My brother slept with my girlfriend, and I nearly kill asterisk at him. Hey Reddit, I'm Chris, 29, and my life recently took a turn that I never saw coming. My younger brother, Matt, 25, was my best friend, my rock through tough times until he did the unthinkable. He slept with my girlfriend, Lisa, and when I found out, I nearly lost control and almost did something I'd regret forever. Here's the story of how betrayal ripped my family apart and how I'm trying to piece my life back together. Growing up, Matt and I were inseparable. We were only 4 years apart, but I always felt like more of a father figure to him than just a big brother. Our parents, Sarah and Mike, were busy people. Mom was a nurse who worked long shifts at the hospital, and Dad ran his own small plumbing business, often working late into the night. Matt and I were left to our own devices most of the time, and I naturally took on the role of protector. We grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Our house was modest but cozy, tucked away on a quiet street where we'd spend our summers playing football in the yard and riding bikes with the neighborhood kids. Even though our parents worked hard, they were loving and supportive, and they raised us to always have each other's backs. Brothers look out for one another, Dad used to say. No matter what. Our childhood was a mix of fun, freedom, and the kind of trouble that only brothers can find. We'd play pranks on the neighbors, build forts in the woods behind our house, and challenge each other to ridiculous dares, like jumping off the roof of the garage or sneaking into the local movie theater without paying. Even when we fought, it never lasted long. We'd argue over who got the last slice of pizza or whose turn it was to take out the trash, but by the next day, we were back to being partners in crime. Matt was the more outgoing one, always the life of the party with a mischievous grin that could get him out of trouble with a simple smile. I was quieter, more reserved, the one who made sure Matt didn't go too far with his pranks or get into too much trouble. I can't count the number of times I covered for him when he missed curfew or got into fights at school. No matter what, we were a team. High school was when Matt really started to shine, or at least, that's what everyone else thought. He was the star quarterback, the golden boy who could do no wrong in the eyes of our parents and teachers. I was proud of him, but it also meant I was often in his shadow. While Matt was winning games and going to parties, I was working part-time jobs to save up for college, doing my best to keep us both out of trouble. Despite his popularity, Matt always made time for me. We'd spend weekends playing video games, going fishing at the lake, or just talking about our plans for the future. He'd confide in me about his dreams of playing college football and eventually going pro. I'd tell him about my aspirations to start my own business one day, to make something of myself beyond our small town. We were more than just brothers, we were best friends, and nothing seemed like it could break that bond. I still remember the night after one of Matt's biggest games in high school, a Friday night under the lights, where he'd thrown the winning touchdown. We sat on the hood of his beat-up truck, sipping cheap beer and looking at the stars, talking about how far we'd come and how far we wanted to go. No matter what happens, Chris, he said, looking at me with that cocky smile of his, we're always going to be alright. You and me against the world. We had this unspoken pact that we were in it together, that no matter what life threw at us, we'd face it side by side. When Matt's grades started slipping because of football and the pressure of being the school's golden boy, I tutored him every night, helping him study for tests and finish assignments. I wasn't just doing it to help him stay on the team, I was doing it because I wanted to see him succeed. I believed in him more than anyone, even when he didn't believe in himself. After high school, things began to change. I got into a local college, majoring in business, while Matt, as expected, got a football scholarship to a big university a few states away. We were both chasing our dreams, but it meant we didn't see each other as much. We kept in touch, calling and texting when we could, but life was moving fast, and we were both busy. Still, every time we talked, it was like nothing had changed. Matt would fill me in on his latest games, the parties, and the girls who flocked to him like he was a celebrity. I'd tell him about my classes, my internships, and the girl I'd started dating, Lisa. Lisa and I met during my sophomore year. She was smart, funny, and beautiful, with long dark hair and a smile that lit up any room she walked into. We clicked immediately, bonding over our love for movies, hiking, and late-night drives with no destination. It wasn't long before we were spending almost all our free time together. Lisa was everything I'd been looking for, and for the first time, I felt like I had someone who understood me in a way no one else did. Lisa was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She had this infectious energy that drew people to her. One minute, she'd be debating some obscure philosophy, and the next, she'd be cracking jokes that made everyone around her burst into laughter. She was also fiercely independent, juggling school, work, and volunteering at a local animal shelter. Being with her made me feel like I was part of something bigger, like I was moving toward a future that actually excited me. I introduced Lisa to Matt over Christmas break, and they got along great. Matt was charming as ever, and Lisa seemed to enjoy his humor and easygoing nature. I was happy that my brother and my girlfriend got along so well. It felt like my two worlds were coming together perfectly. We spent that holiday as a trio, hanging out at family gatherings, going to bars, and reminiscing about old times. One night during that break, we all ended up at a local dive bar, the kind with dim lighting and a jukebox that only played old country songs. We sat at a corner table, swapping stories and laughing like nothing else mattered. Matt was in top form, entertaining us with tales of his college adventures, and Lisa was right there with him, matching his energy and throwing in her own sarcastic remarks. At one point, Matt raised his glass and said, "Here's to Chris, the only guy I'd ever trust with my life." He gave me a wink, and we all clinked glasses. I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of pride, like I'd finally found my place in the world with the two people I cared about most. But as time went on, Matt's life started to unravel. He got injured during his sophomore year of college, tearing his ACL, which put an end to his football dreams. He tried to stick it out, but without football, he struggled to find his place. He dropped out of college halfway through his junior year and moved back home, bouncing from one odd job to another. Our conversations became less frequent, and when we did talk, he always seemed down. The confident, happy-go-lucky brother I'd grown up with was slipping away. Matt was lost without football. It was like he'd built his entire identity around being the star athlete, and when that was taken away, he didn't know who he was anymore. He'd spend days holed up in his room, avoiding calls from his old friends and barely talking to our parents. I tried to be there for him, but I was balancing school, work, and my relationship with Lisa, and it was hard to find the time. I'd invite him to come visit, hoping it would lift his spirits, but he'd always make excuses. Meanwhile, Lisa and I were growing closer. We moved in together during my senior year, sharing a small apartment not far from campus. I was working hard, juggling classes and a part-time job at a marketing firm, but it felt like my life was moving in the right direction. I'd catch up with Matt whenever I could, inviting him to hang out with us when he was in town. Lisa would always welcome him with open arms, and I was glad she was there to help me support him. But looking back, maybe I should have seen the signs. The way Matt would linger a little too long when he hugged Lisa goodbye, the inside jokes they'd share that I didn't quite get, and the late-night texts between them that I brushed off as harmless. I trusted them both completely, and the thought of betrayal never crossed my mind. It was a Saturday night, one of those rare weekends when Matt and I managed to find time to hang out like we used to. Lisa was out with friends, and Matt had come over to my apartment to watch a game, have a few beers, and catch up. We spent the evening like old times, joking around and reminiscing about high school, but something felt off. Matt seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly, his laughter a bit too forced. I noticed that Matt's phone kept buzzing, and every time it did, he'd glance at it quickly, his expression darkening before shoving it back in his pocket. I asked if everything was alright, and he brushed it off, saying it was just some work stuff. I didn't press him. I figured he'd talk when he was ready, and I didn't want to ruin the mood by digging into whatever was bothering him. After a few hours, he said he needed to head out early, claiming he had some work stuff to take care of in the morning. I didn't think much of it. He'd been acting weird for a while, and I figured he was just dealing with his own stuff. I gave him a hug, told him I loved him, and watched as he left. It was such a normal moment, so ordinary, and I had no idea it would be the last time I'd look at my brother the same way. Later that night, Lisa came home. She was quiet, unusually so, and I could tell something was wrong. She said she was tired and went straight to bed, barely speaking a word. I thought maybe she just had a rough night out, but the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The next day, while Lisa was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Matt. It wasn't just any text, it was a picture of the two of them from the night before, clearly not just friends. Matt's arm was draped around her shoulders, and they were both smiling in a way that made my stomach churn. The caption read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My mind went blank, and I just stood there, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. It felt like a nightmare, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Every detail of that picture felt like a knife twisting deeper. The way Matt's hand rested on Lisa's hip, the way she was leaning into him, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. It was like a cruel parody of every happy memory we'd ever shared as a trio, warped into something ugly and painful. I wanted to believe it was just a joke, some kind of sick prank, but deep down, I knew it was real. When Lisa came out of the shower, I confronted her, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. "What the hell is this, Lisa?" I said, shoving her phone toward her. She froze, her face draining of color as she realized what I'd seen. There was no way to deny it. She tried to apologize, stumbling over her words, saying it was a mistake, that she was drunk, that it didn't mean anything. But her excuses only fueled my rage. I couldn't even hear her. All I could think about was Matt, my brother, my best friend, doing this to me. Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she tried to reach out, but I stepped back, my mind reeling. She kept saying it was a one-time thing, that she loved me, that it was a moment of weakness. But all I saw was the betrayal, the lies, and the realization that the two people I trusted most had been hiding this from me. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and stormed out, ignoring Lisa's desperate pleas for me to stay and talk. I needed to confront Matt, to hear it from him, to understand how he could betray me like this. I drove to his apartment, my mind racing with a mix of fury and heartbreak. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I could barely see straight through the haze of anger clouding my vision. When I got there, I didn't bother knocking. I kicked the door open, finding Matt sitting on the couch, looking startled. He tried to stand up, but I lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him against the wall. "You slept with her!" I screamed, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "How could you do this to me?" Matt's face was a mix of fear and guilt. He didn't fight back, he just stood there, letting me unleash all the anger I'd been bottling up. "Chris, I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for this to happen." But his words meant nothing to me in that moment. I was consumed by rage, blinded by the betrayal of the two people I trusted most. I shoved him harder, my fist clenched, ready to hit him, ready to hurt him as much as he'd hurt me. Matt didn't resist, he just looked at me with tears in his eyes, and that only made me angrier. I raised my fist, every muscle in my body screaming for release, but then I stopped. I saw the fear in Matt's eyes, and for a split second, I remembered all the good times, all the memories, and the bond we'd once shared. My hand shook, but I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. Instead, I let go, shoving him away and collapsing onto the floor, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Matt tried to approach me, but I pushed him back, tears streaming down my face. "Get away from me," I choked out. "You've ruined everything." I left his apartment that night, my heart shattered, my mind numb. I drove aimlessly for hours, not knowing where to go or what to do. I'd never felt so lost, so betrayed. I couldn't go back to Lisa, and I couldn't face Matt. My world had fallen apart in an instant, and I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I moved out of the apartment I shared with Lisa, crashing on a friend's couch while I tried to figure out my next steps. Lisa called me constantly, begging for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. Every time her name flashed on my phone, I felt a wave of anger and sadness all over again. I ignored Matt's calls too, not ready to hear whatever excuses or apologies he had to offer. I felt trapped in a cycle of rage, disbelief, and heartbreak. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping it was all just a bad dream, but the pain was always there, gnawing at me. I'd lie awake at night replaying every moment, every conversation, trying to pinpoint when things had gone so wrong. Had they been sneaking around behind my back for months? Did Matt ever feel guilty when he looked me in the eye and acted like nothing was wrong? I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd drive around town in the middle of the night, passing by old haunts where we used to hang out, the diner where we'd get burgers after Matt's games, the movie theater where Lisa and I had our first date, the park where Matt and I had once spent hours practicing his throws. Everywhere I went, I was haunted by memories that now felt tainted and hollow. My parents found out eventually, not because I told them, but because Matt broke down and confessed. I got a call from my mom, her voice shaky and filled with worry. "Chris, what's going on?" Matt told us about Lisa. Hearing my mom's voice broke something in me. She didn't sound angry or judgmental, she just sounded heartbroken, like she couldn't believe her boys were at odds. I told her everything, sparing no detail. It felt good to let it all out, but it also felt like I was putting a knife through her heart. Mom tried to keep the peace, but Dad was furious. He called Matt, yelling at him for betraying his own brother, and their relationship soured almost overnight. Our once close-knit family was fractured, and every holiday, every family gathering, was filled with tension. I stopped showing up to family events altogether, not wanting to be in the same room as Matt. I missed the way things used to be: family dinners filled with laughter, late-night talks with Matt where we'd share our hopes and fears, the unspoken understanding that we had each other's backs. But now, every interaction felt forced and awkward, like we were all pretending nothing had changed when, in reality, everything had. My parents tried to keep up appearances, but even they couldn't hide the cracks that were forming. One night, after a particularly ugly argument with Matt over the phone, I went to a bar and drank until I could barely see straight. I ended up in a fight with some guy who bumped into me, and it wasn't until I saw my reflection in the bathroom mirror, bruised, bloodied, and broken, that I realized how far I'd fallen. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. I'd let my anger consume me, and I was on the verge of losing everything. I quit my job, unable to focus on anything but the mess my life had become. I spent most days in a fog, bouncing from one friend's place to another, trying to numb the pain with alcohol and meaningless hookups. I was spiraling, and I didn't care who I hurt along the way. I pushed away everyone who tried to help, convinced that I was beyond saving. My parents continued to reach out, but I ignored them. I couldn't face their disappointment, and I couldn't deal with the constant reminders of what had happened. I'd see pictures of family gatherings on social media, Matt smiling like nothing had changed, and it would send me into a rage. How could he move on so easily while I was drowning? I started going down a dark path, filled with reckless decisions and self-destruction. I'd stay out all night, crashing on random couches, and waking up feeling emptier than the day before. I wasn't just angry at Matt and Lisa, I was angry at myself for being so blind, for trusting too easily, and for not seeing the cracks that were there all along. One particularly bad night, I found myself at a party filled with strangers. I drank more than I should have, trying to drown out the pain, and ended up in a shouting match with some guy who looked at me the wrong way. We traded insults, and before I knew it, I was swinging. Fists flew, and I barely remembered how I ended up on the floor, bleeding and dazed, with my knuckles throbbing. As I stumbled out of the house, I realized I was becoming the kind of person I'd always hated, the kind who lashed out because they didn't know how to deal with their own pain. The turning point came one night when I got a call from my dad, telling me that Matt had been in a car accident. He was drunk, just like I often was these days, and he'd wrapped his car around a tree. Miraculously, he wasn't seriously injured, but it was a wake-up call. I realized that we were both on a path of self-destruction, fueled by guilt, anger, and the inability to confront what had happened between us. I went to see Matt in the hospital, not because I was ready to forgive him, but because I couldn't stand the thought of losing him. He looked terrible, bruised, bandaged, and with the same lost look in his eyes that I saw in my own reflection. For the first time in months, we were face to face, forced to confront the mess we'd made of our lives. "I'm sorry, Chris," Matt said, his voice breaking. "I know I messed up. I've been messing up for a long time." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to unleash all the pain I'd been carrying, but seeing him like that, so broken and vulnerable, I couldn't bring myself to do it. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "I almost killed you that night," I finally said, my voice raw with emotion. "And maybe part of me wanted to. But I can't keep living like this, Matt. It's killing us both." Matt nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I never meant to hurt you, Chris. You're my brother. You're the only real family I've ever had." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. We talked, really talked, for the first time in months, laying everything bare. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes, but for the first time, I felt like we were at least on the same page. We both needed help, and we both needed to figure out how to move forward. After Matt's accident, I realized that I couldn't keep drowning in my own anger. I needed to get my life back on track, not just for myself, but for the people who still cared about me. I started going to therapy, something I'd always been skeptical of, but it turned out to be exactly what I needed. My therapist helped me unpack all the layers of pain, betrayal, and guilt that I'd been carrying. She pushed me to confront my own role in the fallout and to start taking responsibility for my actions. One of the hardest things to face was my own rage. I'd spent months blaming Matt and Lisa for everything, but therapy forced me to look at the ways I'd been sabotaging myself long before they betrayed me. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who held everything together, but I'd also been bottling up my own emotions for years. When everything finally exploded, it was like opening a floodgate that I couldn't close. Therapy was like peeling back layers of armor I'd built over years of trying to be the strong one. I realized that I'd spent so much of my life putting everyone else's needs before my own, and when Matt and Lisa betrayed me, it felt like the ultimate failure. I'd been trying to keep everyone together, but I hadn't been taking care of myself. My therapist helped me see that it was okay to be angry, but that I couldn't let that anger define me. I also had to confront the guilt I felt for nearly attacking Matt. I'd come so close to losing control, to doing something that would have haunted me for the rest of my life. My therapist helped me see that my anger wasn't just about Matt and Lisa, it was about years of feeling like I had to be the protector, the fixer, and the rock for everyone around me, even when I was falling apart inside. Matt started going to therapy too, and for the first time, he began to confront his own issues, his insecurities, his struggles with identity after losing football, and the deep-seated need for validation that had driven him to make so many reckless choices. He apologized to me over and over, not just with words, but with actions. He stopped drinking, started working on himself, and slowly began to rebuild his life. It wasn't easy. We both had setbacks. There were days when I'd fall back into old habits, letting anger get the better of me, or when Matt would struggle with guilt and shame. But we kept showing up, for ourselves and for each other. Therapy wasn't a quick fix, but it was a lifeline, a way for us to start untangling the mess we'd made and to begin healing. Our relationship didn't magically heal overnight, but we were both making an effort. We'd meet up for coffee, go to therapy sessions together, and talk openly about our struggles. It was messy and uncomfortable, but it was also necessary. We were learning how to be brothers again, without the weight of the past constantly dragging us down. Forgiving Matt was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant letting him off the hook, but I came to understand that it was more about letting go of the anger that was eating me alive. I didn't have to forget what he'd done, but I did have to stop letting it define me. It was a slow process. We'd take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, falling into old patterns of blame and defensiveness. But we kept at it, committed to rebuilding what we'd lost. I started to see the Matt I used to know, the funny, charismatic kid who always had my back. He was still in there, buried under layers of guilt and regret, but he was fighting to come back. I had to learn to set boundaries, not just with Matt, but with myself. I'd spent so much time sacrificing my own happiness to keep the peace, and I realized that I couldn't do that anymore. I had to prioritize my own well-being, even if it meant putting some distance between me and the people I loved. Lisa was another story. We talked a few times, and she apologized for everything, but it was clear that we couldn't go back to how things were. The trust was gone, and while I eventually forgave her in my heart, we both knew that it was best to part ways. She moved to a different city, and I focused on moving forward. It wasn't easy, there were moments when I missed her, when I wanted to reach out, but I knew that chapter of my life was over. Matt and I began doing things together that we hadn't done in years. We went hiking, played basketball, and even started working on a small side business idea that I'd been mulling over for a while. It wasn't about making money, it was about reconnecting and finding a way to be brothers again. Each day felt like a step towards something better, something that wasn't defined by our mistakes. I also started rebuilding my own life. I got a new job, moved into a new apartment, and began dating again. It was scary at first, opening myself up to trust someone new, but I was determined not to let my past define my future. I met someone who understood my struggles, who didn't judge me for my baggage, and who helped me see that I was capable of being happy again. A year after the fallout, Matt and I took a road trip, just the two of us. We drove down the coast, stopping at random towns, hiking in national parks, and talking about everything: our childhood, our mistakes, and our hopes for the future. It wasn't a perfect trip, there were moments of tension and awkwardness, but it was real. It was us trying to be brothers again, to rebuild what had been broken. On the last night of the trip, we sat on the beach, watching the sunset, and Matt turned to me. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did, Chris," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I'm trying. And I'm grateful that you're still here." I didn't know what to say at first. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as sharp as it used to be. I looked at Matt and saw my brother, the same kid I used to play catch with in the backyard, the same guy who'd been by my side through every up and down. We were different now, but we were still family. "I'm trying too," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're gonna be alright, Matt. We always have been." That moment wasn't some grand reconciliation, but it was a step. It was two brothers, scarred but healing, making a promise to keep moving forward. We sat there in silence, letting the waves crash against the shore, knowing that we still had a long way to go but that we were finally on the right path. Final update: finding peace, living life on our terms. Now, at 29, I'm in a much better place. Matt and I are closer than we've been in years, not because we've forgotten what happened, but because we've faced it head-on. We've put in the work, both individually and together, to rebuild our relationship and to grow as people. We've learned to communicate, to be honest, and to support each other in ways we never did before. I've also learned to forgive myself. I spent so long blaming myself for not seeing the signs, for not being the perfect brother, and for almost letting my anger destroy everything. But through therapy, self-reflection, and the support of those who love me, I've come to accept that I'm human, that I made mistakes, and that it's okay to move on. I'm still working on myself every day, still healing, but I'm finally at peace with where I am. I've got a job I love, a supportive partner, and a family that, while imperfect, is trying to be better. I've stopped running from my past and started building a future that isn't defined by my darkest moments. To anyone reading this who's struggling with betrayal, anger, or the weight of family conflict, know that you're not alone. It's okay to feel hurt, it's okay to be angry, and it's okay to take time to heal. But don't let that anger consume you. Don't let it take away the good things in your life. There's always a way forward, even when it feels impossible. Thanks for listening, Reddit. I'm still figuring things out, but I'm doing it on my own terms, and for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.